My project for my senior thesis is the use of anime to validate suffering. So, the problem that I argue in my paper is Japan is a nation that simultaneously committed war crimes and experienced trauma during World War II. What does this problem do? A binary is created in Japanese consciousness, Japan as victim versus Japan as perpetrator, thus allowing for different interpretations, expressions, and internalizations of trauma. The solution that I argue for in my paper is anime, which serves as a method of expression to accept and reflect on the atrocities committed on both sides during World War II. So, some historical background. The atomic bombs Little Boy and Fat Man were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, Japan on August 6th and 9th, 1945. After Japan surrendered, the United States occupied Japan from 1945 to 1952. And during this time, the Civil Information and Education section of the Allied occupation forces taught Japanese citizens the quote-unquote truth about the war atrocities Japan had committed, but much of the information on Japan's colonization were not taught to the public in order to exploit and bolster the democratic ideological frontier of an occupied Japan against its neighboring communist powers. In other words, America was using Japan as a quote-unquote democratic nation to hopefully rub off on other countries around them, such as China, Korea, etc. Due to this withholding of information, Japanese citizens either had to educate themselves or remain ignorant of their country's crimes. This led to the binary previously discussed of victim versus perpetrator. Furthermore, as soon as occupation ended, Japan was quick to begin producing art referencing the war. Fast forward to the 1980s, Japan underwent a period of technological and economic prosperity known as the economic miracle of post-war Japan. And it was during this time that two anime films were released, Akira and Grave of the Fireflies. This brings us to trauma theory. James Berger explains in his piece Trauma and Literary Theory that trauma is not a single event. It is everything that happens afterwards while processing the trauma just as much as, if not more, than the traumatic event itself. Furthermore, the dispersal across time provides a reason that we still see movies, shows, and art depicting the event today, 75 years later. When the human mind and body experiences something so catastrophic and unfamiliar, it becomes almost as if the mind relives the event repeatedly since the brain can't process it. This brings us to collective memory. Aleister Swaley argues that memory is a collective phenomenon, having a traumatic experience be at once individual but also a tapestry of a nation's calamity. As far as telling the stories the Japanese people wanted to tell, the occupation of Japan after World War II by America prevented such stories from being told. As soon as they were able to, however, Japan discarded the view of the occupier after the occupation ended and instead replaced it with the tales of tragedy that we see in Japanese film. This brings us now to Grave of the Fireflies, which is based on a semi-true story called A Grave of Fireflies by Nosaka Akiyuki. The reason that I say it is a semi-true story is because in the story, his sister dies, as does in the movie, but in real life, his sister did not die. They just both suffered hardships together. This movie enables Japan to validate the suffering faced during World War II. Then we have Akira, which repeats the traumatic event of the atomic bomb as it takes place in an alternate future 2019 Japan, where World War III has happened and is threatening to happen again. It warns that Japan's rampant militarism can lead to totalitarianism, potentially risking a repeat of history if national imagination is not changed. So I argue that anime is a form of healing. The way trauma of an event is represented on screen changes generationally as the story of testimony is no longer a first-hand experience. As the memory of the event changes and the time distances a nation from a calamity, so too does the medium of expression change form, theme, and implication. The use of animation in Grave of the Fireflies, for example, is arguably what makes the movie watchable. Reviewers of the film have said that if instead it was live action, the film would be too unbearable, the depictions of injury and devastation from the bombings would be too realistic and too sadistic for a viewer. Hence, the power of animation allows us to relive this experience in a way that is therapeutic for us and for the people who make the movies.